I am Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College Archivist Charles Sullivan. In April 2012, Joanna Martin, a librarian at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College Jackson County campus, contacted me at my office on the Perkinston campus about some volumes that could be transferred to the archives if I agreed. The volumes, titled Marine Engineering and Shipping Review, were donated years ago by Robert H. Slaughter, Jr. I knew that Slaughter had once been a member of the MGCCC Board of Trustees and that he had been an official of Ingalls Shipbuilding Corporation in Pascagoula. The dates on the volumes spanned the 1940s, including all the years of the Second World War. So I figured that the history of Ingalls from its beginning through and beyond World War II might be in these volumes. I asked Joanna Martin to send the books and discovered that not only did the books contain the early history of Ingalls, but they also contained a wealth of photographs illustrating that history. In an unrelated conversation with my friend Doug Mansfield, who operated the TV studio at Jackson County campus for over 30 years and who, since 2007, has been the production supervisor and chief engineer at WKFK Channel 7 in Pascagoula, I happened to mention the Ingalls material. I told him if he ever needed anything on Ingalls to let me know. He said, okay, I need it right now, because we're celebrating the bicentennial of Jackson County, and Ingalls is a big part of the modern history of Jackson County. Well, Jackson County is a big part of the story of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, having been a member of our 4-county support district since 1925. And Ingalls has been a big part of the story of MGCCC for at least 50 years, particularly in regard to the Jackson County campus and specifically to the welding program. Doug told me that Ingalls Shipbuilding Corporation had no record of its early history, and he said the Pascagoula Library has very little. He said much of this lack is due to hurricane damage in general, especially Katrina. I told him that I would put everything I'm doing on the back burner and see what I could find out about Ingalls. I further told him, I cannot give you the comprehensive history of Ingalls, but I can give you an illustrated rendition of the documents and photographs related to Ingalls found in the holdings of the MGCCC archives. I can give you the beginnings from the Robert H. Slaughter Maritime Engineering and Shipping Review collection, together with the photos and documents in our Dixie Press and CC Tech's Hamel Down South magazine collections. In short, I can give you an overview of the history from the beginning to about 1980. Doug said he wanted it, so here it is. In 1910, Robert Ingersoll Ingalls, a native of Huntsville, Ohio, bought a small ornamental ironworks in Birmingham, Alabama. That same year, his wife, Ellen, presented him with a son and heir, Robert Ingersoll Ingalls, Jr. After that, Ingalls Sr. was known as Old Bob, and Ingalls Jr. was known as Young Bob. Under Old Bob's direction, the Ingalls Iron Works entered the steel fabrication business, but instead of joining overlapping steel plates with the ear-splitting rattle of riveting, workers at the Ingalls Iron Works quietly and seamlessly welded steel plates together. The Ingalls Iron Works specialized in industrial tanks and boilers. As the Great Depression began in 1930, instead of retrenching, Old Bob expanded his business to include the production of all welded ships and rivercraft. In 1930, he leased a portion of an abandoned World War I shipyard at Chickasaw, Alabama, upriver from Mobile. 3 years later, at the North Alabama town of Decatur on the Tennessee River, he established facilities for the building of barges and towboats. At the Chickasaw shipyard, Ingalls constructed Transoil, the world's first all-welded sea-going tanker. The Chickasaw shipyard, however, produced little else because in 1938, Ingalls learned that Governor Hugh White was committed to bringing industry to his state in order to prime the pump on a stagnant economy too long based on cotton and timber. White's Balanced Agriculture with Industry program, BAWI, given legal status by the state legislature when White took office in 1936, offered tax breaks, site preparation, bond issues, and other inducements to industrialists. In September 1938, Old Bob sent two of his executives, Monroe Lanier and William R. Guest, to the Mississippi Gulf Coast to search for a possible site for a shipyard. On September 16, 1938, a group of Jackson County's leading citizens took the Ingalls executives to the site of an abandoned World War I shipyard on the east bank of the East Pascagoula River estuary. Following preliminary negotiations and site work funded by Jackson County, a contract was signed on December 6, 1938. Thus, the Ingalls Shipbuilding Corporation became a subsidiary company and division of the Ingalls Iron Works of Birmingham, Alabama, and the jewel in the crown of Governor Hugh White's BAWI program. While White enjoyed other successes, none rivaled this BAWI contract, which set Jackson County on the road to becoming the industrial heart of Mississippi, and which eventually resulted in Ingalls Shipbuilding Corporation becoming the largest employer in the state. Governor White's BAWI program sparked Ingalls Shipyard in Pascagoula, but President Franklin D. Roosevelt's preparedness program fired it up. FDR knew that someday the United States would have to fight Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, and he did not want America to have to come from a standing start as it had in the Great War of 1917. With a 3,000-mile wide ocean between him and Nazi Germany on one side, and a 4,000-mile wide ocean between him and Imperial Japan on the other side, he needed ships of all kinds, cargo ships, troop ships, and warships. Consequently, shipbuilders were about to get a lot of business. The new Ingalls shipyard in Pascagoula was composed of 46 acres with a 3,000-foot waterfront. In January 1939, the barge building equipment from Chickasaw, Alabama, was moved to a section of the Pascagoula site, and all welded barges were soon being fabricated and launched. On February 20, 1939, ground was broken in another section of the 46-acre site for the construction of all welded ships. On July 15, 1939, Ingalls secured an order for 4 17,600-ton C-3 cargo ships from the United States Maritime Commission. 2 keels were laid by August 14, 1939, a third on August 23rd, and the fourth the day after Christmas, 1939. In February 1940, the Marine Engineering and Shipping Review published a photographic tour of the new Ingalls shipyard at Pascagoula. This series of photographs is the earliest known comprehensive view of Ingalls at its inception. Here, 3 gantry cranes stand in front of the 4 C-3s being built on the ways fronting the East Pascagoula River. In what one wag termed the longest assembly line in the world, prefabricated ship sections made at the Ingalls Iron Works in Birmingham arrived daily at Pascagoula by rail, barge, and truck. These prefabricated sections appear here with overhead gantry cranes which transport them from place to place. Sometimes old Bob arrived at 4:30 in the morning with the prefabricated sections and walked a mile to the shipyard, much to the surprise of his administrators and workers. The following series of photographs will show what old Bob would have seen in February 1940. The administrative offices and the stacks of assemblies brought by rail from the Ingalls Iron Works in Birmingham. Warehouses and steel plates and the shipways construction site. Continuing the tour, a February 1940 visitor would have seen the following. the interior of the mold loft, lining off an assembly platen, looking west in the fabricating shop, furnace and forge shop. An Ingalls worker uses a single operation welding machine. Ingalls workers use a two-man welding machine. Second deck plating in position on wood frames. Workers erect second deck assemblies. Gantry crane with locomotive crane below operating on tracks between the shipways. A gantry crane operator lowers a deck hatch. Bottom shell plating on a way on the East Pascagoula River. A view of the shipways from East Pascagoula River. The practice of fabricating 80% by weight of ship sections in the Birmingham Iron Works and sending them to Pascagoula continued throughout World War II. This eliminated costly duplication of production machinery and had the salutary effect of avoiding the need to house thousands of extra workers at Pascagoula. As it was, Pascagoula's pre-Ingalls population of little more than 4,000 increased to more than 30,000 in 5 years, with 12,000 of those being Ingalls employees. These were housed in thousands of federal housing units. On June 8, 1940, 15,000 people witnessed the launching of Ingalls Shipbuilding Corporation's first ship and the world's first all-welded dry cargo vessel, the Exchequer. At 11:56 a.m. on that day, Mrs. Max Truitt cracked the christening bottle against the bow of the 492-foot-long, 69.5-foot wide C3 cargo ship, which then slid down the ways into the East Pascagoula River. In early 1941, old Bob purchased an antebellum beachfront home in Pascagoula to provide accommodations for wartime VIPs visiting the shipyard and as a place for receptions. The house, originally called Bellevue, was rechristened Longfellow House by old Bob. This he did in honor of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's reference to Pascagoula in his poem, To Build a Ship. Following the initial order for 4 C3 cargo ships, Ingalls contracted with the American South Africa Line to build 4 C3 passenger liners. On June 28, 1941, the African Comet, the world's first all-welded passenger liner, slid down the ways into the East Pascagoula River. The U.S. War Department already had contingency plans to convert passenger liners into troop ships in case of war. On August 23, 1941, Teresa Murray, after a party at the Longfellow House, broke a bottle of champagne against the bow of the C3 passenger liner African Meteor, and it slid into the East Pascagoula River. On September 27, 1941, the third African liner, the African Planet, was one of 14 ships launched coast to coast on what FDR termed Liberty Fleet Day. At 12:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, FDR delivered a special broadcast to the American people, at the end of which the first Liberty ship slid down the ways at the Bethlehem Fairfield Yard in Baltimore, Maryland. That ship, the Patrick Henry, was the first of 200 EC-2 Liberty ships planned for the U.S. Merchant Marine and 112 slated to be delivered to Britain under the Lend-Lease program. These Liberty ships were designed to be mass-produced on a standard design crewed by 44 men and officers for the purpose of hauling freight and convoy from the United States to Britain and Russia. But the African Planet, which Ingalls launched in Pascagoula that day, was not an EC-2 Liberty ship. It was a C-3 passenger liner. In time, Ingalls Shipyard in Decatur, Alabama on the Tennessee River would receive orders for 6 Liberty ships. Oddly enough, Ingalls launched ocean-going ships 1,000 miles from the sea, but the Pascagoula yard never built a single Liberty ship. It built C-3s. On December 7, 1941, the naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan attacked the American Navy base at Pearl Harbor in the Hawaiian Islands. FDR declared war on Japan and a few days later declared war on Nazi Germany, and the United States government requisitioned all ships ever launched by Ingalls, including even the Transoil, which had been built at the Chickasaw, Alabama yard. The Transoil would be in the thick of it in the Normandy invasion. The Exchequer became the USS Pocomoke, a seaplane tender that would earn 2 battle stars in the Pacific. The African Comet would become the USS Arthur Middleton and serve in the Aleutian Campaign. The African Meteor would become the attack transport USS Samuel Chase, which would land troops in North Africa, at Normandy, and on Okinawa. The Samuel Chase would become the most famous of all Ingalls' wartime ships and would earn 5 battle stars, sustaining no damage. The crew would dub the ship Lucky Chase. Apparently, all the ships made by Ingalls were lucky. None was sunk. Not even the 4 C-3s modified into flat tops and transferred to the British through the Lend-Lease program as convoy escorts. One of these, HMS Battler, was the first British combat ship ever built in the United States. In the wake of Pearl Harbor, American shipyards went on around-the-clock schedules for the purpose of producing as many vessels as possible for the war effort. A week after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Maritime Commission decreed that the formal launching ceremonies for its merchant ships would be discontinued as a time-saving measure. Formal christening ceremonies would be allowed, but these should be scheduled during the workers' lunch hour. Old Bob, shown here at left in attendance at Pascagoula for the launching of the SS Seahawk, continued christenings, but as to the launching itself, he was even stricter than the commission. He would not even let the launching crew watch the ship slide into the water. As the ship began to move, he wanted the launch crew setting up keel blocks for the next vessel. Ingalls, of course, specialized in the C-3. The all-welded C-3 was 600 tons lighter than a riveted C-3, and thus could carry more cargo, traveled faster, and could be built more quickly. One welder with a torch could do the work of 3 or 4 riveters equipped with 40-pound air hammers. The superiority of welding over riveting became apparent to the U.S. Maritime Commission when a report pointed out that 500,000 tons of steel could be saved by the use of welding in the Commission's 705-ship program. One researcher pointed out that that much steel could be used to build an extra 227 cargo ships. Most American shipyards, though, riveted their ships and continued to do so for a variety of reasons. When women entered the ranks of the workers in heavy industry to do the jobs of men at war, their symbol became Rosie the Riveter. Ingalls countered that image with Vera the Welder. 19-year-old Summerall native Vera Anderson, who barely tipped the scales at 110 pounds, had been an Ingalls welder for a year when she vied with West Coast champion Hermina Stremiska for the title Woman Champion Welder of America. Ingalls hosted the contest at Pascagoula on May 28, 1943. Vera won the title, which included $350 in war bonds, a massive silver loving cup, and an all-expense-paid trip to Washington, D.C., where First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt hosted a reception in her honor at the White House. The National Association of Manufacturers invited Anderson to be its guest at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York on December 9, 1943, for the Second War Congress of American Industry. She and 5 other women doing jobs formerly considered for men only attended. She was the only Southerner. On January 29, 1944, Anderson defended her champion welder title by defeating West Coast champion Edna Slocum. The following month, the Associated Press named her as one of the 10 outstanding women of America. Anderson finished the war as a welding instructor for both men and women at Ingalls. American Export Lines President John Slater, watching a C-3 slide into the East Pascagoula River at the end of the longest assembly line in the world, remarked, "This is the first time that I ever saw a big ship launched without a shipyard." But by war's end, more fabricating shops had been built on site, and dependence on the prefabricated assemblies from the Birmingham Iron Works was lessening. By the close of 1945, Ingalls Shipbuilding Corporation at Pascagoula was a major national shipyard, and with 10 shipways and a steady workforce of about 8,000, the largest employer in the state of Mississippi. While other shipyards foundered, Old Bob made the transition to peacetime production without difficulty because he kept making primarily the same ship. He made 4 C-3s before the war. He made 60 C-3s during the war. He made C-3s after the war. Of the 35 merchant ships constructed in the United States from 1946 to 1948, Ingalls built 20 of them. 18 of those were C-3s. But C-3s could be beautiful. The first luxury liner to be built after the war was the Del Norte. She was one of 3 identical ships, the others being the Del Sud and the Del Mar, being constructed at Ingalls for the Mississippi Shipping Company's Delta Line. The Del Norte was launched January the 11th, 1946. And was the first vessel to be fully air-conditioned for passengers and crew. The Grand Salon of the Del Norte, a stateroom of the Del Norte, the Del Norte Deck Cafe with murals of New Orleans, Old Bob Ingalls Sr. and young Bob Ingalls Jr. sit together on a Del Norte cruise. Old Bob Center and young Bob Wright overlooked the Grand Salon of the Del Norte in 1947, the last year of peace between the two. The Ingalls shipyard at Pascagoula and the other one at Decatur on the Tennessee River continued to prosper, as did the fabrication plants in Birmingham, Alabama, and Verona, Pennsylvania. Profits kept rolling in despite the bitter 4-year conflict between Old Bob and Young Bob. Young Bob, once praised by his father for his business acumen, stands with one of his subordinates in the Ingalls shipyard at Pascagoula. Old Bob had retained the title and power of chairman of the board, but he had elevated Young Bob to the presidency of the company in 1941. With the job of president came a large block of stock. Father and son worked together in harmony until Young Bob divorced his wife, Eleanor, in June 1947. Old Bob, who doted on his daughter-in-law and his 2 granddaughters, Elizabeth and Barbara, was not amused by the divorce. He also was not amused by Young Bob's taste for luxury in the form of yachts, money, status, power, and women. In May 1948, when Young Bob decided to marry Jane Sevier, a widow with 3 children, Old Bob went ballistic and fired Young Bob for inefficiency. Old Bob wanted to block a stock back that he had given Young Bob. He hired an armed guard to carry $2,120,000 in $1,000 bills and offered the money to Young Bob for the stock. Young Bob refused, and in time he filed 30 lawsuits to keep the stock. The court fight eventually reached the Alabama Supreme Court. When the court found for young Bob, old Bob became so enraged that he suffered a stroke and died 2 days later on July 12, 1951, at age 69 years, at Highland Baptist Hospital in Birmingham. After the death of his father, young Bob once again became associated with the company, but his mother and the hand-picked executives that old Bob had left in charge kept him out of mischief. In 1951, the year of old Bob's death, his executives finally realized the long-held dream of landing U.S. Navy contracts. The Cold War provided the need for new warships, and Ingalls' willingness to bid low to get a first deal provided the opportunity. Ingalls secured a contract to build 5 LSTs, landing ship tank. These shallow draft vessels were designed to plow right up to the shore and disgorge battle tanks and other heavy military vehicles. After that success, Ingalls secured contracts on 8 LSDs, landing ship docks. These huge ships partially submerged near a shore and served as a fully outfitted docking facility to serve smaller vessels. The success of delivering the LSTs in 1953 and the LSDs in 1954 and 1955 led Ingalls executives to spend millions to make the Pascagoula Yard a major installation able to compete for the cream of naval construction, destroyers and submarines, both conventional subs and nuclear subs. Ingalls' first destroyer was the USS Morton, launched May 23, 1958. Ingalls' first submarine was the USS Blueback, the first submarine built in the South since the Confederate States Hunley in the Civil War. The Blueback held yet another distinction. It was the U.S. Navy's last conventional diesel-electric submarine. 3 months before the Blueback's launching on May 16, 1959, Ingalls laid the keel for its first nuclear sub, the USS Sculpin. C.C. Tex Hamill, owner of Down South magazine in Biloxi, was invited on the press tour for both subs, and his press packets and photos were still in the files when his widow Marge donated the Down South magazine collection to the Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College Archives in 2005. The Blueback's 8 officers, 9 chief petty officers, and 65 enlisted men raised the first flag at the October 15, 1959 commissioning ceremony at Ingalls. In attendance at the ceremony are, from left, Ingalls President F.J. Mayo and Mrs. Mayo, Mrs. Robert H. Gaucher and her husband, commander of the Blueback. In one of those quirks of history which occasionally occur, Lieutenant Commander Robert H. Gaucher grew up at 641 Columbus Drive in Pascagoula with a view across Grant's Lake of the gantry cranes of Ingalls that would one day build him a ship. Next to Commander Gaucher is Ingalls Industries Chairman of the Board and CEO Robert Ingersoll Young Bob Ingalls Jr. and Jane Ingalls. At far right is Congressman Bill Calmer. On June 13, 1960, while on sea trials, the Blueback hove to 12 miles south of Horn Island for a rendezvous with Ingalls' yacht Ronda II to take aboard 20 newsmen, including C.C. Tex Hamill of Down South magazine, who made most of these photographs. The pressmen go down the hatch, and the Blueback goes under the sea. Sub-Commander Robert H. Gaucher welcomes the visitors aboard and then shares a cup of coffee with them. The ship's tour includes the mess hall, which features a TV and a 6 plays for a nickel jukebox. In the control room, the newsmen meet the helmsman and the plainsman, who are somewhat analogous to pilot and co-pilot. The first goes right to left, the other goes up and down, by command, not by sight. Hamill photographs 2 of the 3 diesel-electric engines that power the sub. No visit to a sub would be complete without a view of a torpedo tube. Gaucher checks 360 degrees as the sub surfaces in order to avoid a collision. The newsmen prepare to go up the hatch. Hamill is the last to depart as dark closes in. The Sculpin, Ingalls' first nuclear sub and the first built in the Deep South, was commissioned June 1, 1961. 8 days later, the Ingalls press boat with newsmen, including C.C. Tex Hamill, speeds to a rendezvous 12 miles offshore. Hamill photographs newsmen boarding the sail. The Sculpin dives and Hamill snaps this shot 80 miles out and 400 feet down. From left, Ingalls' public relations director, Albert C. Skeeter Weeks of Perkinston, Sculpin Commander C.M. Mitchell of Syracuse, New York, and Times-Picayune reporter Bill Miner of New Orleans. Members of the Sculpin crew of 88 men and 10 officers at their posts. Ingalls Vice President Earl Hammett chats with James Ryerson of Station WMDU of Greenville, South Carolina. The torpedo room. Disembarkation. The return to the press boat. 6 months after the Sculpin press trip on December the 7th, 1961, Litton Industries acquired Ingalls Shipbuilding Corporation. In retrospect, this acquisition, occurring as it did on the 20th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, portended physical changes to the Pascagoula shipyard even greater than that affected by World War II. On January 11, 1968, Litton Ingalls broke ground on 611 acres of marsh on the west bank of the East Pascagoula River for a $130 million shipyard of the future. This first new shipyard since 1945 was dedicated to modular construction. The SS Austral Envoy was the first ship built in that manner in the new yard. The mid-body and stern modules are already integrated, while the bow module is at left. All modules are now joined. The completed 10,394-ton ship moves to a special launching platform at 22 inches per minute for 4 hours. The launch platform sinks and the Austral Envoy floats free. With the coming of the shipyard of the future, Litton Ingalls received billions in government contracts. But the photos in Down South magazine collection lessened as the 1970s went on and stopped altogether when the magazine ceased publication with the July-August 1980 issue. My purpose here has been to share the photos and documents of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College archives related to Ingalls. This I have done. In closing, I wish to say that in April 2001, Northrop Grumman Corporation acquired Litton Ingalls. In the decade which followed, I never got used to referring to the Pascagoula shipyard as Northrop Grumman. I always called it Ingalls. On March 15, 2011, Northrop Grumman Corporation approved the spinoff of a subsidiary to be called Huntington Ingalls. 11 days later, WLOX-TV Channel 13 announced that a Pascagoula shipyard is returning to its roots. It will again be known as Ingalls. A lot of people, including me, will never call it anything else. Old Bob Ingalls started this yard with the help of Governor Hugh White's BAWI program 3/4 of a century and more than 300 ships ago. It should always bear his name.